In the latest episode of Vinland Saga, episode 13, we were led to believe that Askeladd was a descendant of Artorius, a man who could have been the historical basis for King Arthur. But before we open that can of worms, let's investigate the historical records of this enigmatic officer of the Roman army. For the majority of his military career, Artorius carried the rank of centurion, i.e. an officer that commanded 100 or century of men. 4 out of the 5 men in the century were legionaries, or professional heavy infantrymen. These Roman soldiers were the preeminent fighting force of their time, and their effectiveness in battle was recognized by various commentators even centuries after their disappearance. The remaining 20% of the century constituted servants and orderlies. In terms of Artorius' florit, i.e. the date or period in which the person was active or alive, experts are in disagreement, as no dates are given on the various inscriptions on his sarcophagus or memorial plaque. It is suggested, however, that his florit was between the mid-late 2nd century AD or early to mid-3rd century AD. According to recent dating, scholars now believe that fragments of the sarcophagus date to no later than 200 AD. Meaning that Artorius probably died before that time, and would not have been alive during the 3rd century as previously suggested. Unless, of course, Artorius had his sarcophagus made before his death. Just to hang out in and take quick power naps in.
The dead man's curve!
Oh, the living.
After years, possibly decades of being a centurion, Artorius, in his old age, achieved the rank of prefect, a military role reserved for 50 to 60-year-old men who had been in the army most of their lives. Duties as a prefect included maintenance of the fortress in which they were guarding, and authority over the food supplies, munitions, and equipment. As you can imagine, this role saw very little fighting and was mostly administrative in nature. Before finishing his career, however, Artorius led an expedition as a dux, or a general in charge of 2 or more legions, against either the Armacans, the part of Gaul between Seine and Loire River, which is now part of the modern-day Brittany and western France, or the Armenians. Because of the campaign in Armacan, i.e. Brittany, and the various other military accolades that he achieved in his lifetime, and the plausibility of the Welsh name Arthur deriving from the Latin Artorius, was enough for one man, Kemp Malone, a medievalist, etymologist, and philologist, to make the connection between the two. That being said, King Arthur, if he was a real person, is speculated to have lived during the 5th and 6th centuries, which would have been 200 to 300 years before Artorius' time. Also, many of the inscriptions on Artorius' sarcophagus are open to interpretation, which makes it very difficult to attribute certain achievements to Arthur's legacy. Thus, Malone's ideas were disregarded for decades, until Helmut Nickel came along and introduced a theory known as the Sarmatian connection. Under this supposition, Nickel postulates that a group of Sarmatian cavalry serving under Artorius inspired the Knights of the Round Table, and kept his legacy alive over the centuries, eventually blending in the myths of the magical sword and the cauldrons. A few years later, independent of Nickel's work, Covington Scott Littleton, an anthropologist, expanded upon the Sarmatian connection theory, arguing that elements of Arthur's story derived from Caucasian mythology. While the evidence of Kemp Malone, Helmut Nickel, and Covington Littleton is fascinating, many Arthurian scholars have concluded that their deductions are based on conjecture and weak connections. I do find it interesting, however, that the man who could have inspired the enigmatic, possibly fictitious King Arthur may have also been fabricated himself. As a side note, the Sarmatian connection served as a basis for the 2004 film King Arthur. Directed by Antoni Fuqua. In any case, whatever you choose to believe is your own prerogative. I just wanted to provide some information on Artorius since he was mentioned in Vinland Saga and the little connection that some people in films have made with Artorius and King Arthur. That being said, I hope you enjoyed this little Vinland Saga history lesson, and I'll catch you on the flip side.
Don't you have satellite TV?
Well, no,
Muffy does. Maybe she'll even invite you over sometime.
I am the one, the way your son don't need a gun to get